So as I just mentioned, when going through the book, just make sure to follow along your syllabus, specifically the course schedule in the syllabus. It outlines basically how you should be keeping up with the chapters throughout the next few weeks. And so let me start by asking you guys if you have any general questions about the book or the report or anything else regarding our class so far. All right, so let me go over the book report guidelines with you. So, I do this in the first lecture, but I'll spend a little bit of time on this with you now. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And so you can feel free just to speak up, but also I turned on the chat. So if you have a message, you can send it through chat as well. So overall, the book report is due the 29th. So, we got a few weeks, but just don't wait till the last minute to start it, because when you wait too long, then you kind of rush through it and the quality suffers. So, I'd say as you're going through the book, always have the report guidelines in mind. And so if you see a part in the book you can use to write your report, then you have that information there rather than going through the book and then kind of starting from scratch with the report after you finished it. So overall, we're looking at 3 full pages double-spaced, and as long as you're doing what I'm asking you to do, you shouldn't have any trouble at all meeting that 3-page minimum. If you go over, if you go over like 4 or 5 pages, that's fine. I don't take off any points when you go over in the page amount, but I do take off points when you don't reach it. So, many of the papers will be around 4 to 5 pages. Because I think at minimum, you have to write 3 full pages to do what I'm asking you to do. But for the most part, students' papers will be longer than that. So basically, we're looking at 3 different parts that will comprise the report. The first part gets into the thesis. So Lareau went into the book looking at 2 main things, social class and race, and how those things influence parenting styles, how somebody raises their kid. And so that's kind of the idea going into it. And then, kind of during the research and afterwards, she finds that one of the 2 variables matters more than the other. So here I'm asking you to identify for Lareau, what is more important when it comes to parenting? Is it the race of the family or is it the social class in the family? Yeah, so basically when it comes, we got a message, and basically, what we're looking at is citing the book. Whenever you're kind of referring to information in the book, kind of making a point by using information in the book, whether it be a direct quotation or whether it be a kind of paraphrasing idea. So you take an idea, you just don't say word for word like what's said in the book. It's called a paraphrase. You'll cite for the reader basically where that comes from. So the way we cite in sociology, the ASA format is the author's last name, so it'd be Lareau, the year of publication, 2011, and then the page or pages where you can find that information. So if you take a quote, or if you're talking about information found on page 20, you would have that information there. So you cite for 2 reasons. So you're not accidentally or perhaps intentionally plagiarizing. You're giving people credit for doing the thinking, for coming up with the ideas. But also you cite to let the reader know where they can go to if they want to read up more. So if I say, oh, that's an interesting idea you had in your paper, then you tell me where I can go to the book to find it. So basically that's how you would approach, more or less, you'll be using citations, and every paragraph, sometimes you'll be citing multiple things in every paragraph. So that's how you want to approach kind of citing the book. Always kind of tell the reader where the information is coming from. And if you use like a different citation style, that's fine as well. A lot of students know like MLA, APA, that's fine as long as you're kind of telling me where to get it. I just provide you the kind of sociological way of doing it, because we do have a lot of social crim majors, and we do expect you to learn this by the time you finish school. So good question. So getting back to 2, 3, and 4 of the report, like I said, the first part basically asks you to identify the thesis of the 2 variables, which matters more for Lareau when it comes to explaining parenting styles, and then basically explain your choice. So you're going to pick either race or class, then explain why that is more influential when it comes to parenting styles. And then for 3, you look at the main 3 ways that she is supporting her thesis. So she has this argument, her thesis, then she supports it throughout the book in 3 main ways. The different connections between this key variable and parenting styles. And if you look at the table of contents of your book, basically she divides it up to the organization of daily life for the kids. So the first connection, language use in the family, that's the second connection. And then families and institutions, that basically means how the families are interacting with their kids' institutions, how they interact with their kids' schools, with their kids' sports, for example. So that's what we're going to be getting at for number 3, kind of talking about those connections, but also for number 3, we'll be talking about, why class matters. So what is it about class that's shaping these different parenting styles that she finds? It doesn't happen out of thin air. So what is class actually doing to promote one way or another? And then finally, at the end of the paper, we'll talk about the variable race. So how can race influence parenting styles? What does this look like in the book? So any questions about the report guidelines? All right, so we'll be coming back to this, throughout the different lectures, but also in our next live sessions as well. So let me minimize that, and then can everybody see the slides I have up? Okay, so I don't want to go through everything word for word like I did in the recorded lectures, but just because we're here together, I think we could spend a little bit of time on the reading for today and the introduction to the book. So here we talk about what we mean in sociology by race and by social class. Race is a socially created category in which we kind of put people based upon such things as skin tone, hair type, and then race is something that is very fluid. And so we have our own racial categories in the US, but they're not the same racial categories everywhere. So I have here, for example, if you look at South Africa and Brazil, they have different numbers of races, but also different types of race. So we always think that race is strongly tied to biology. It is, because we use biological traits to put people in racial categories, but race itself is socially constructed because we create the categories and we recreate them over time. And that gets into, in the United States, for a while, if you're Italian, if you're Irish, you were considered to be non-white. You weren't part of that Caucasian category like you would be today. And you look at this different numbers of races. You look at 1880 versus 1850, there are three types races versus five. And it wasn't because the Chinese or Indians weren't here in 1950. Rather, it's because we haven't socially constructed the racial categories yet. And now we have, I think over 14 choices. So we kind of create and recreate categories. That's what we mean when we say kind of race is a socially constructed category. And then we can get into class. Class basically is a category based upon your income and your assets. Income is basically the money you earn through wages, through a salary. Assets are basically things that you own that you can sell, you can cash in if you find yourself in a bind or simply if you want more money. So, you can think of cars, homes, jewelry, artwork. Again, anything basically, stocks, for example, you possess and you could sell if you want money. So I always say assets represent potential money because they're not really worth anything until you sell it. Often we link class to one's lifestyle, what you drive, where you live, what you wear, what you eat, what you drink. And class reproduction I'll touch on because that's a big part of the book. Basically, statistically speaking, people are more likely to reproduce their class background than not. In other words, mobility is possible. You can go up in class, upward mobility, or you can go downward mobility. But for the most part, people, about 7.5 out of 10 people stay in the same class position they're born into. If you're born wealthy, odds are you're going to stay wealthy. If you're born in the middle class, odds are you're going to stay in the middle class, so on and so on. So that's an idea that we need to understand the Rose Book. Any questions so far? Okay. So as I just mentioned during the discussion on the directions for the report, the main focus is twofold. She went into the research, her team of researchers went into the work looking at both race and social class and how race and class shape parenting styles, and then how those parenting styles contribute to class reproduction. So why does one's parenting style contribute to their kid staying in the same class, whether it be staying in the wealthy or middle class, or how does the parenting style contribute to the kid staying in the working and lower class? So that's kind of the focus of the book. And I guess I'll let the cat out of the bag right now. The thesis is going to be that social class matters more than race. So the main argument is going to be, yeah, race does matter, but social class matters more. Social class shapes parenting styles, and those parenting styles, as a result, contribute to people reproducing their class position. And so, again, we'll talk about race and why race does matter, but we see class matters more. And we'll talk about that kind of next week when we get into the book. But more or less, what you see when you have an African-American family and a white family from the same class background, they parent in the same ways. When you have a white family who is working class and a white family who is upper class, they parent in different ways. So although they're both white families, they come from different class backgrounds, and those different class backgrounds contribute to the different parenting styles. Likewise, what I said, when you have African-American family and a white family, different races, but when they share a class background, they typically parent in similar ways. So that's what we're looking at there. And so the two main parenting styles that they found were labeled to be concerted cultivation and accomplishment and national growth. And so here, keep in mind that they went into the research, interviewing families, observing families, and then throughout the research, they find these distinct patterns emerging. obviously there's going to be overlap. It's not black and white, but they did find these patterns emerging that you see more of this in one parenting style and you see more of something else in the other. And they labeled these styles, the concerted cultivation, the CC parenting, or the natural growth, the NG. And so for today, I really wanted to make sure that we understand these two types of parenting styles. So overall, what I tried to do here is look at some different characteristics, and we'll come back to these characteristics, throughout the book. But more or less, just to get us a good head start on how to think about concerted cultivation and natural growth. We can say that concerted cultivation is connected to the middle and upper class families. So when we say concerted cultivation, when we say CC parenting, we need to think of the middle and upper class individuals. Likewise, when we say middle and upper class, we need to think of the concerted cultivation parenting style. And so on the other hand, when we think about the natural growth parenting style, that connects to the working and lower class families. So when we think of working in lower class, we need to think of the NG, natural growth parenting style. So that's important to understand. And then we can get into some characteristics of each. And again, these characteristics we'll talk about more as we go through the book. Free time is basically, how much free time the kid has or doesn't have on their hands, on a daily basis. And you see that the NG kids have a lot more free time on their hands compared to the CC kids. The CC kids have more structured time. And by structured time, they're enrolled in a lot of formal activities. They're going to school, and they may have a band practice, they may have different sports they're playing. So they're always kind of running around from one formal activity to another. In comparison, NG kids maybe have one activity they do outside of school, but for the most part, they're not overscheduled. They're not always doing something. They have a lot more free time on their hands. Reasoning, you see a lot more reasoning going on in the CC families. The parents is trying to get the kid to explain their thoughts, justify their beliefs. And you see more black and white directions in the NG families, where the parent typically is kind of saying, do this or do that, or have you done this, have you done that to the kid? And there's less kind of back and forth. There's less kind of reasoning going on between the parent and child. And so we can get into closeness to the institutions of the kid. So how close is the parent to the kid's sports, to the kid's school? You see more involvement in the CC families, and you see, again, in comparison, less involvement. So again, everything is a comparison. All families, no matter their parenting style, are involved in their kids' schooling, but some families are involved a little bit more. They go kind of above what's asked of them. And the other parenting style, there's more distance. In the NG style, they're still kind of doing stuff, but they're kind of just doing what's asked of them, kind of the minimum, rather than kind of going above what's asked of them. Often you see the kids of the CC parenting style involved with a lot of adults. So there's always an adult around. That's what I mean by same spheres, whether it be a parent, an instructor, a coach. Usually there's an adult presence with the kid. Again, in comparison, the NG kids are more likely to be with their peers. No adults around, just kids of the same age group. So finally, we'll talk about this near the end of the book. The NG kids develop over time a sense of constraints, when they go to school, when they're at these different institutions such as work, they kind of feel like, everything's against them. They don't feel like a fish in water. They feel like more of a fish out of water. They feel constrained. They just want to get by. They just want to survive. As a result, the CC kids get a sense of entitlement. They believe that the world is not against them. The world is theirs to do whatever they want with. So it's a whole different mentality they take into schools, they take into work. And we'll kind of talk about those mentalities, again, as we go through the book, especially at the end. So any questions about the two parenting styles and kind of what separates them? All right, so basically that was, what I wanted to get through in the first lecture for today, your reading for today. Um, as always, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. And what I'll do now, I'll stop recording